On today's episode of What's Going On with Shipping, the ILWU is filing for bankruptcy. I'm your host, Sal Mercogliano. Welcome to today's episode. So, if you are an avid follower of What's Going On with Shipping, which I assure you are, but if not, hey, subscribe and like, you will know that we have followed the ongoing labor negotiations between the International Longshore Warehouse Union and their 22,000 West Coast employees and those of the Pacific Maritime Association, the big shipping firms and terminal operators on the West Coast. Well, that negotiation, which had been going on for years, I mean, their previous contract expired back in 2015. They now have a new contract that's been ratified by the unions and the locals. Behind the surface, underlying everything that was going on, I kept hearing from union members, and I heard from lots of union members, some negative, a lot of pro, thank you so much, and from members of the PMA, that this issue that we're going to talk about today was the issue that was always going to be the one that was going to fall like a sword of Damocles on the ILWU, and that is the reason for the bankruptcy that we're going to talk about. If you're new to the channel, hey, do take a moment, subscribe, and like. So let's take a look at what the union has said. This is the letter that went out from the union on October 1st. We write to share you important information. Due to the sensitive nature, we were unable to share this with you until now. About an hour ago, the ILWU filed for bankruptcy protection under Chapter 11. This action was taken after careful consideration in order to protect this union and its members now and in the future. So the genesis for this issue has to do with a ruling by the National Labor Relations Board between actions taken by the ILWU and their local chapter, Local 8, up in Portland, Oregon, versus a terminal operator known as ICTSI. So there was a case that was filed in 2012 in U.S. District Court. There was a trial held 7 years later in 2019, 2-week trial, and in it, the ICTSI, the terminal operator, was awarded $93.6 million in damages, allocated between the ILWU 55% and Local 8 in Portland 45%. On March 5th of 2020, a judge ruled that the damages there was supported to be a total of $19,061,248. Unfortunately, the ICTSI did not accept that ruling. They rejected it. They have now filed a new appeal, and they're going to get a new hearing to hear about not whether or not the ILWU is guilty. That's been already done, to hear damages. And they're requesting between $48 million and $142 million. And since the ILWU is saying they don't have the cash reserves for that, they are filing Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. They go on here in their letter to say that they're going to continue to operate as usual, that this is not a liquidation, that they will continue to function normally and support their locals. They'll continuing education and training and organizing programs. But this, they say, is the only way they have to get out from under such a huge fine that's being leveled on them. Now, you should be asking yourself at this point, well, Sal, what did they do so wrong that the National Labor Relations Board found them guilty of this? The federal district court found him guilty of this, and this company decided to levy this huge fine against them and get it in court. Well, for that, we come over to this story by Greg Miller over at Freightway. So, according to the ILW president, Willie Adams, while we have attempted numerous times to resolve this decade-long litigation with ICTSI Oregon, at this point, the union can no longer afford to defend against ICTSI's scorched earth litigation tactics. We intend to use Chapter 11 process to implement a plan that will bring this matter to resolution. The officers are confident that we're taking the right step. Now, this comes just a month after they got this new labor agreement. So what's the story here? Well, go to another Greg Miller story. This is how a fight over 2 jobs bankrupted the union of 40,000 dock workers. ILWU proposes handing over most of its remaining cash to ICTSI. But I want to go back a little even further than Greg's story here to the original story. And this is the LA Times from 2019. How a feud over 2 jobs tipped the West Coast Longshore Union toward bankruptcy. That's right. This entire bankruptcy stems from 2 jobs. And I mean 2 jobs. That's it. There were 2 people working in Portland, Oregon, that caused this. And Lil Sundet, who is a official for the ILWU, is one of the big players. It may seem far-fetched that a dispute over two jobs could financially ruin a union, so powerful that all West Coast ports shut down for days when its contract talks break off, but that's the case. The Portland jobs tending refrigeration containers, these are called reefers. These are boxes with refrigeration units on board. So when you transport items that have to be kept at a constant temperature, you have containers that have refrigeration units. They are plugged in the trucks or rail, then they're plugged in on ships. But when they get to the terminals and they're put on the ground, they have to be plugged in and monitored. That was a job for two people in the port of Portland. And since 1974, it was done by members of the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. It deals with Robert Big Bob Elrath, who retired last year as union president. This is back in 2019. He saw precedent in the two contested Portland reefer jobs. If I let those jobs go and demanded that they be set aside or whatever, it would bleed up and down the entire West Coast. In some ways, Sundet 63, whom McElrath assigned to pursue the jobs at Portland's Terminal 6, embodies the proudly militant approach of the union founded by the late Harry Bridges, a Marxist. He was a union leader who won respect, championed civil rights and equality, but Sundet's scorched earth tactics stymied judges, confounded 3 Oregon governors, increased cost of trade, and affected his reputation among fellow union members, who in 2015 voted him out of his $307,000 a year post. Sundet, who did not return phone messages seeking comments, started as a dock worker in the 80s. He favored skepticism, having come from the Pacific Maritime Association. He worked his way up in 2004 when he addressed a Democratic National Committee panel in Portland. So according to the facts presented in the case, and this is what's laid out here, Sundet told the Portland terminal manager in 2012 that he might as well tell shipping lines to depart because we're going to send them packing. Sundet guided the local chapter as members drove trucks and cranes slowly, took indirect routes around the container yard, packed vehicles to block in reefers, and faked mechanical problems. Teamsters fumed as hundreds of trucks backed up outside the port. Container ships spent extra days in port or skipped calls on Portland. Legal gridlock ensued, while the ILWU pressed ICTS Oregon to give it the two jobs under the term of the union's West Coast labor contract. Company managers said the positions wasn't theirs to give. They said that according to their terminal lease, the jobs were controlled by the Port of Portland. The next year, shipping lines Hanjin, Hapag-Lloyd decided to leave their port for good, leaving only Westwood, a small carrier. As Hanjin's final vessel prepared to go, Michael Radak, a manager of the shipping line, begged employers to get the union to load the ship at a normal pace. We did what the union wanted and we left. Now they need to repay the favor. In 2017, ICTS Oregon paid $20 million to exit its 25-year lease to operate the terminal, an expense included in the $135 million in damages the company sought from the union. At the trial, the jury took 3.5 hours to return the verdict and award $94 million to the ICTSI. Now, let's be clear about something, too. ICTSI is not without problems here. You can go see their track record. It's not great in many ways. The Port of Portland had substantial problems beyond this, not the least of which you're on the Columbia River, which is a terrible port to come into. It's really tough. It's one of the toughest entrances to a U.S. port is the Columbia River bar, extremely tough. It's a long voyage down the Columbia River to the terminal, which means a lot of fuel is spent on that. Plus, you're in Portland. You're basically offloading for the local area. You're not offloading in Portland to shift stuff eastward because you got to go over the mountains or up around the top of the Rockies or below the Rockies. So it's not a great port to begin with in many ways, just because of its locale. It has services, but there are a lot of reasons that the Port of Portland suffered. But there's no doubt that the ILWU wanted these jobs back and targeted these two jobs to do it. And that's not just me talking. That's the jury. It's the jury. 12 jurors came back in 3.5 hours and ruled on this. But the problem now I have is that the union has got to figure out this deal. Filing bankruptcy is because they have less than $10 million in cash on hand, and they can't afford to pay this out. Now, remember, the guilty parties here is the ILWU and the local union. It's not the locals in the other ports. The ILWU itself is probably about 25 people. staff that runs everything, and then their legislative agendas and all the things that they do, training, coordination, you name it. But now they're filing Chapter 11 bankruptcy. And again, you have to raise that question. You just had this huge contract negotiation. Willie Adams, the president of the ILWU, was sitting down with President Biden. He was meeting with the President Biden's Secretary of Labor designate at the time. So he was obviously talking about what was coming down here. And the question is, what happens on the West Coast? I think what happens is the ILWU is going to have to go bankrupt. I mean, it's going to have to pay it. It's pretty clear that tactics used by the ILWU was found guilty in this case. I wasn't there. I can't comment on whether or not they were work stoppages or not. But obviously, a jury proved it and or at least believed what was presented before them. And the question is, what goes forward? You're not going to see a disruption on the West Coast. The unions are going to keep working. We're definitely going to see cargo keep moving. But it raises another issue on the West Coast. There's a lot of questions about bringing cargo into the West Coast. We're seeing cargo shift heading toward the Panama Canal to the East and Gulf Coast. Does this further undermine the position of the ILWU on the West Coast? Obviously, they wanted to push this out and wait until the contract negotiation was in place before having to file bankruptcy, because they couldn't really do that while negotiating at the time. It would be a problem. Whew. If you want to know why I love studying shipping and this industry, right here, this is the topic. These are the things that never go away. This is quite a story. It is a interesting story, and definitely one that I'm going to be following going forward. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. Leave a comment, share it across social media, and if you can, support the page. How do you do that? Well, if you're the ILWU, you're probably not going to send me money because you're going to need it for the bankruptcy. But if you're not, hey, you can hit the super thanks button down below or head on over to Patreon and be a monthly, yearly subscriber to the page. Until our next video, this is Sal, signing off.